And it looks like we are live. Everybody out there, it's nice to see you out there, all you people in project management land. We're super excited to have you today for our February monthly webinar. A couple different things. We're going to get started here with a little bit of introduction in case you're new to our group. I know we added a bunch of people in the month of February from our project management fundamentals class that was held earlier this month. So we kind of like to give a little bit of overview to the new people. If you've been here before, bear with us, please. So a little bit of information here. All right. So what are we? We are the community of practice for project management professionals inside of SUNY, the State University of New York. We also do serve some people outside of the SUNY community in our group. We're trying to create a space. We want to give those professionals a place where you can share your best practices, initiate discussions, and learn about different project management topics and concepts and things like that. We like to foster that discussion through a couple different things. These monthly webinars, which are held on the fourth Thursday of every month at 11 in Workplace. We also do a lot of discussion posts so people can take a look at those, posting about training resources out there in different topics inside project management from some different sources. We like to put some polls out there, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And of course, also training opportunities. What can you do to help, further your career in regards to project management? So a little bit about us. We are your moderators. My name is Kris Lynch, if I haven't met you before. I am a program coordinator with the SUNY Center for Professional Development. I specialize in technical programs. My contact information is there. I am always open to hearing from you about anything and everything. Let me know what you think, what we could improve on, what we could do more, all that sort of stuff. So Krista, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kris. I'm Krista Glassman. I work in the project management office at ITEC. I've been here about 11 years. We established the project management office at that time. We have 3 full-time project managers. What we like to do with this community of practice is to, like Kris said, share all of our best practices, share our stories, share our successes and our challenges with running projects at campuses and also across all of SUNY. This group is very active. Kris does a wonderful job in posting good material and good articles and videos about the day-to-day life of project management. Many of you may not be full-time project managers, but you are asked to run projects for your campus. I would ask you that you might spend a few minutes every week or so or every day and just comb through some of those articles, because there's some great tips and great tidbits that can help you smooth the way in running projects at your campus.
Thanks, Krista. All right. So a little bit about this month's webinar. We are taking something from the past. If you aren't aware of it, there used to be a SUNY PM community led by Krista and other members at ITEC that was the predecessor to our group. And we are stealing one of their wonderful webinars that they had back in March of 2011, talking about requirements and testing, ensuring project success. Krista, do you want to talk a little bit more about this?
When we first started SUNY PM back in 2011, we did quite a few call for topics, and people came back to us and asked for help in trying to really get to a way to get contribution and an engagement from functional users on campuses for products and IT services that those same functional users had asked you to deploy. So I think many of you might be in situations where you find out about a software purchase or a deployment purchase. You find out about it after it's already been done and already been purchased, and now it's thrown over the wall to IT to support. So what we tried to do with this webinar is to help get down into the weeds as far as how do you decide what those requirements were for those functional users, and how do you really test against their purpose and their success. So we're going to break down a more granular way of trying to record requirements, and then how do you test against those requirements so that your functional users who purchase this product actually get the benefit of its use after it's been deployed, and that it's supported in a manner in which it is helpful to anyone who is using the product.
Wonderful. All right, so before we get started, I usually do these slides at the end, but because this is a recording, I was just going to zip through them right now. Let's see right here. So just to let you know, some upcoming monthly webinars and some other things that are going on in the community of practice, if you haven't been there recently. We do have a webinar coming up in March on March 25th at 11, and one coming up in April on April 26th. I'm sorry, April 22nd at 11. We did just post what the March webinar is going to be. We have a training of MS Planner coming right from Microsoft. There's some more details in there about what the training involves. MS Planner is an option for you to use to manage your projects on your campus if you are interested in it. The nice thing about it is all the campuses that hold either an A3 or an A5 license already have this product with Microsoft 365. It does allow a lot of different abilities, including assigning tasks and looking at task progress and stuff like that. So we thought we would feature that to give people an idea of maybe a tool that you already have on your campus that you could implement pretty quickly and use pretty easily. So Microsoft will be doing a training for us then. We haven't decided on our April 22nd training yet. I apologize, webinar yet, but those information will be coming out soon. And just to let you know, we will not be having a webinar on May 27th. That is actually happening during CIT week. If you're not aware of CIT, it is an annual SUNY conference on instruction and technology. It's held by CPD, my group, and as well as the FACT2 Council. These slides will be posted later, and that link will be live so that you can click on it and find out more information. It's a virtual conference this year, which allows a lot more people to go and is a very low cost point. So if you're interested, take a look at that, and maybe we'll see you at CIT as well. And then finally, just some upcoming professional development opportunities we have. If you've never taken the Project Management Fundamentals course here from the SUNY CPD, it's a wonderful course that gives you an introduction to project management. It may be beyond some of the members of our community practice, or you may have already taken it. But if you have other people at your organization that you think might be interested in learning about the project management lifecycle, we do offer these courses. The latest one we have now is on Monday, May 3rd and Monday, May 10th. We're also looking to hold a couple more either in the spring 2021 semester or early summer 2021 as well. So that link will also take you to the information page so you can see more about the class and what it actually offers and the different dates and times it's available for. All right, so without further ado, we are going to bring up our recording and get this started. All right, so you can kind of see on the left-hand side the different participants of this recording that you can take a look at. Krista, did you want to say anything about the people that are moderating this webinar?
There were 3 of us on from ITEC's project management office, myself, Phil Vecchione, and Ralph Chili. All 3 of us are full-time project managers with ITEC, and we split up our duties based upon the types of projects that come into our portfolio. We do a lot of infrastructure work. We do a lot of build outs of large deployments for new services such as Banner, Degree Works, Ensemble, Blackboard, library systems, what have you. So we split up our work in our portfolio between the 3 of us. So all 3 of us, I believe, are participating in some way. You'll hear my voice, you'll hear Ralph's voice, and I'm sure you'll hear Phil's voice as well.
Wonderful. So, and just to let you know, we will post this recording out to our YouTube, the SUNY CPD YouTube, so that if you want to share it with somebody outside of our community practice, it is available. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to get this started. Krista, could you do me a favor and just make sure you can hear my audio and let me know?
I will do that.
Without further ado, I'm going to introduce myself as the presenter today.
I can hear Ralph.
Perfect. All right, we will get going then.
Krista and I are actually both presenting today, and judging by some of the initiatives we've undertaken so far with our year or so here at ITEC, what we noticed was sorely lacking were defined requirements and testing to ensure that the original requirements that were very fuzzy at best were actually met through some sort of quality metric. So as we sat and I don't know how many projects we've undertaken or managed so far or been involved with, it's definitely dozens. I'd say that has been a consistent issue that has slowly but surely directed itself in the right direction. So the very first thing I'd like to ask the group is, how would you define a successful project? And I mean, and what would you consider success factors in your projects? Anyone? You don't have to raise your hand for this one. You can just belt it out.
I would say on budget, on time, and successfully meeting the objectives.
So successfully meeting, like, say, the business requirements for that?
Right. The scope that was set forth.
Okay. All good. All very good. And how would you go about defining whether those objectives were met? How have you done that in the past? What I've done is, in using like Microsoft Project, I'll have those objectives listed, and whether or not they, from my perspective, it was do this or do that. Was it done, yes or no? Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was, more philosophical, concepts. It wasn't conceptual. It was something that you can check off a list and say, yes, it's done.
I see. Okay, great. I mean, I think that's pretty much where I was going with this. As you can see on the next slide, the official definition of success in the PMI world is delivery of the project as agreed to by the sponsor in terms of scope, which is what the project consists of, quality measures, how you determine whether or not a requirement was met, that it came in within an agreed upon time frame and within the original project budget. So I think it was a good answer. Nice job. So in order to really formalize that process for getting the requirements, we have to determine whether or not this project is the right thing to do. So the very first step in any project is, the very first phase, I should say, is initiation. And without getting into too much detail on initiation, this is where we originally come up with, meet with the sponsor and say, this is what your requirements are. Do you agree with that? Very high-level requirements. And they give us a rough idea of what the time and cost would be, and we come to some level of agreement. And whether it's an internal project or a project for a customer, you need to gain some sort of sponsorship and document all this in your project charter. That is your initial agreement to terms, if you want to call it that, without perhaps signing any type of contract as you would in some sort of commercial transaction. In essence, this is your first unofficial contract. But the largest part of the project is definitely the planning phase. And this is where we fully plan the work to the most minute detail possible. And again, this is where we gather the detailed requirements, which is the what needs to be done. We translate it into the functional specifications, which is how we are going to accomplish those requirements. And we come to agreement with the solution with our customer, and we actually develop the test plan. And these are the quality metrics that I mentioned earlier. And there's a bunch of other things that go into planning. Again, not getting into too much detail, because today we're going to focus on requirements and testing most specifically. So as we mentioned, there's the definition, scope, the budget, the cost, and the schedule. And you can see that all this occurs in the planning phase. And again, typically you're going to spend about 30% of your project time in initiation and planning, because that's where your foundation is laid for success later on. When we get all the planning, scheduling, and associated documentation completed, this is when the team is able to start doing to execute their development. and the project manager steps in and make sure things are running on target. If there's change control, that the team identifies the issues, and we can come back to the customer and say, look, there's a change in scope because of the customer requirement. This is what it's going to do to the budget. This is what it's going to do to the schedule. We manage that throughout the project lifecycle. But essentially, at the end of this execution phase, this is when the team goes in and executes their test plan, which was developed in planning phase, I should say. Does anybody out there actually have some formalized test plan that they're using? And I'll just be quite transparent. There was never a formal test plan here at ITEC before the last few months, when it was something that we just obviously recognized needed to be done. So I'm guessing that's a no. Andrew Martin says no. Okay. All right. So that takes us to a certain point in the project life cycle, and we're going to stop as far as the project life cycle goes and just do a quick recap of the actual process flow. Essentially, at the very beginning, the sponsor and the project managers or a business analyst are going to meet. They're going to discuss the high-level things we talked about in the initiation phase. The project manager will work with, or the business analyst will work a little bit more detailed and get those true business requirements, as you can see over to the right-hand side, documented and agreed upon with the sponsor. At that point, typically it's a business analyst or perhaps an architect or a lead developer is going to help translate those business requirements into functional specifications. And again, this isn't going to happen with every project, but in the ideal solution building mode, this is what would happen. And those functional specifications are going to say, this is how we are going to develop this system to meet a specific requirement. The next step is going to be designing and building use cases. And I know a lot of people may not be familiar with use cases. But essentially, a use case is a description of an interaction or a series of interactions between certain, I guess you would say, people, processes, or even various functions within the product being developed. And they lead to an expected result. And they're often used in software modeling, and it helps the developers or the team that are executing the project determine which features are able to be implemented, and it also can help them identify where errors may occur or issues may arise, so that the project manager and the business analyst can go back to the sponsor or to the customer and say, this is what we're running into when we develop this use case, and it's going to affect these requirements. Let's work on a way to mitigate those particular issues. Once once the use cases have been designed, the developers can truly do their development and then go into, as we mentioned earlier, the testing phase, which kind of goes over to the right-hand side there. And you can see, once we have a formal test case and test plan built, there is a loop that goes back to the develop in case a test fails. What was wrong with the development of this particular product? We go back. We readdress that particular portion of the code or portion of the process until that test case is successfully run. At that point, once all of the test cases are successful, we have what we would call a successful project, because all of the business requirements have been met. So, with that being said, does anybody have any questions at this point on how we would take a business requirement through the process?
All right, a little bit of pause here.
I just wanted to reiterate what Ralph was stating here. he's talking about this circular process flow, where the business requirements feed the functional specs, which feed how you build out test use cases and how you test for them. I just wanted to be very clear that many folks at SUNY have told me that they end up involved in a project like this and testing for software or for services that have been procured elsewhere, and they're then asked to support those projects. I'm telling you, it's very important to understand from the people who actually procured the product in the first place to go back and not skip the step of understanding what their true business requirements were when they went out to procure the product. That is going to open up a lot of doors and windows for you in IT to understand what their thought process was and what they're expecting this new software or service to do for them. If they're not, if they don't have them recorded or written down any place, then it's really important for them to be documented. The requirements be documented so that you can create proper test cases out of those requirements. That's a step that really can't be skipped. And it will help you create and visualize what they're expecting from that software, that service, once it's been deployed and in production. Thank you.
Process all the way to testing.
This is Carolyn Kropp, and I do have a question on your flow here. So I'm trying to get an idea of a distinction, if there is one on your flow chart, between a functional specifications and systems specifications. And does the developer work on those functional specs, or is it within development that he or she translates functional specs into system specs?
So you're talking, when you say system specs, you're talking more technical specifications.
Very technical.
Yeah. This is Krista. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. I can answer that to best of my knowledge. Usually, Carolyn, there is a role or a person or an architect, maybe it's a developer, maybe it's a lead architect, who takes those functional specifications on the business side and does do a translation to how that functional specification is met using technology.
So that particular function is part of the box that you have identified as develop?
Could be.
Could be.
You could also take the same diagram and iteratively perform these same functions, again, replacing that box called functional specs with technical specs.
Okay. Because I find a lot of times we get the loop between develop and test. It takes a very long time.
Right.
And I think sometimes maybe it's a lack of these specifications, just as you're kind of describing here, being outlined correctly for the developer.
Right, and it's really important that not only the functional specifications, but as well as how those specs are going to be met technically, be laid out in a design. Okay. So really, you've heard us talk maybe in the past about gates or approval steps. It's pretty important to have that laid out and have not only your functional design but your technical design laid out and agreed to before the development actually starts. That way, then once you start developing, you have less of a chance or less instance to have to go back to functional specs and rethink or reword or reinterpret them.
Okay, thanks.
And
that help?
And
yes.
It's interesting you brought that up, because I don't want to say we intentionally left it out, but we discussed it as to whether we should include it, and we thought it just might make this a little bit more convoluted than it already seemed in trying to present this process flow.
Okay.
But the technical specifications, as Krista said, are critical, and it's just as critical to identify those at the appropriate point in the process, so that you can test them accurately at the appropriate time towards the end there. So that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay.
If there are no further questions, what we'll do is Krista is going to take over and kind of give some examples of one of the projects that she actually worked on here at ITEC. One of the first projects, actually, that she took on upon starting late last spring. So, Kris.
Thank you, Ralph. Thanks very much.
Just gonna pause here very quickly. Keep in mind, if you're listening to this, this recording is about 10 years old. And obviously technology changes so quickly. This project I'm speaking of and writing this test plan is a product that we had deployed, and I think we've now replaced it at least twice since then. It's a security-based project for PGP. So just keep that in mind, that the PGP is no longer in use to my knowledge here. We've replaced it. However, the principles of creating the functional specs, the technical specs, and the use cases for testing still are solid and valid.
Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt there. The one question I had is a little off where you guys are going. In the life cycles that you were presenting, if you have multiple projects you needed to prioritize, where is that happening in what was just presented?
Okay, I'll take that one, Andrew. And for those that joined the call late, there is a Andrew and I had a discussion earlier about their organization and Oneonta kind of getting into more of a project management, not necessarily a PMO, but sort of a project management methodology and process. And one of the things that any organization struggles with is how to justify whether a project is worth taking on or worth beginning. And Andrew, if you notice, I went back to the initiation slide.
Right.
And here, this is where you need to understand as an organization whether a project is worth pursuing based on whatever your business case may be. And this is also where you would have some sort of prioritization within your organization that would say, not only is this project worth taking on, but it falls here in our priority list. And we have worked with our entire organization here, Kris and I, as the ITEC PMO representatives, to develop just that type of intake and prioritization system. And I think we shared it on a very early webinar with the SUNY PM community. So after this call, we'll send you a link to that presentation, but that would also be something we could help your organization with if we were to come out there and discuss that further.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
Sure thing.
Right, let's get back to, okay. All right, then I'm going to take over at this point and walk you through, as Ralph said, a project that started very soon after we all started here. So it was May, June timeframe of last year. And to frame this project, what it was a project that was one of many smaller projects that lived under the program called security, okay, data security. There are a number of different projects that are underway or in motion with that. I took this one particular one. It was called PGP encryption. And the goal of the project was to administer data security to all of the ITEC staff and the external devices that they had in their possession. So basically, as you know, ITEC has approximately 45 staff members. Each one of us have a multitude of laptops, desktops, and external devices that we're responsible for keeping track of. And we wanted to make sure all of those devices were encrypted, all the data on those devices were encrypted, so we could lock them down. That was the goal of the project. And this was the first time that anything like that had been approached. So there were a number of things to consider, and I will go through first to the requirements. So you should see on your screen now 3 of the requirements. There were many. I think there were 11 total, but I just decided to top 3 we'd put on here. And those business requirements are listed in the left column. The first one being encrypting the campus data when you're outside of the sanctioned data centers. Today, where those data centers are at ITEC and LAS in Albany. The second major requirement was to support an ad hoc security audit. And the third requirement was to support bootable unencrypted storage. So those are requirements that came from our sponsor, and our sponsor is Mike Notarius, the CIO of ITEC. He wanted those things done, and he was looking to us to measure the success of that. Okay, so if you recall back to Ralph's diagram with the flow chart, the next thing that we did was develop the functional specs. Now think of this, when you're looking at these requirements, think of this like you are peeling back an onion. For everything that you dictate here as a requirement, you want to think through the functions of that and how would you make that more practical, or how would you perform that procedure. All right, so my requirement being encrypting the campus data, functionally, this is what it looks like. You take the PGP, which was the product, full data encryption for all laptops and external devices. You want to have a starting point, so you have to take an inventory of those target devices. Now, mind you, there wasn't a lot of places in a centralized location that this inventory was available. So it was fairly random. So we had some gathering to do to get a clean inventory of all the devices that we were trying to target. And again, thinking back through measuring this, in order for us to measure whether or not we made our goal, we have to have something to measure. So we are going to measure how many devices were going to be encrypted. And then we had to take the application, PGP, and apply a security policy to the targets. So we had to come up with a security policy and get that communicated to our staff so that they understood what the policy was and how they were going to be measured on compliance. The second requirement was supporting an ad hoc security audit. The purpose behind this is that at any time, as you can imagine, we purchase new equipment, we retire old equipment, we have support people working out of their homes. They might be using external devices that they purchase on their own at home. We wanted our staff to understand that at any point in time it was really important that they stay compliant within the security policy, and that if they were to procure a new device, that they had a time frame of 2 weeks to get that device encrypted. All right, and we expected our management, or our management asked, to be able to have a report at any given time that they could tell the status of these devices. And thirdly, the requirement was a way for our technical staff get access to bootable or unencrypted storage in case they had a problem with their prime laptops or desktops. In other words, if they had an issue with their primary desktop, and that particular desktop was the one they used to support campuses, we could not take that away from them. So we had to have a way for them to get access to their drives in an unencrypted fashion, but also a policy so that we could get them restored and back into a compliant mode as soon as possible. That meant we had to find a location in our data center to place these non-encrypted drives and then have a check-in and check-out procedure to allow our staff to get there. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop and ask if anybody has questions about how we did the interpretation of the requirement and how we got that documented in the specification. Anybody have questions or comments on how that was performed?
Chris, I'll ask a quick question.
Okay.
Okay, I'll ask a quick question. In terms of going from the business requirements to the functional specifications, is there either a separate document or an approval process that basically checks to make sure that from the business requirement to the translation of the functional specifications that all parties, all stakeholders are in agreement?
Thanks, Bill. Yes. And we can use this as a future topic, for example, but one of the templates that the PMO here at ITEC has created is a project requirements template. And that project requirements template purpose is exactly that, Phil, is to capture those requirements and to talk about them and define them in further detail functionally. So yes, we do have a template to capture that. We have a template to record where the requirement came from and how it's going to be satisfied. Anyone else? All right, then I'll move on. And our next step then is taking these functional specifications and deciding how you're going to test to prove that the specification, after it's been developed, is going to meet the criteria set out by your project sponsor. If you recall in the beginning when Ralph was talking about project success, we had scope, we had quality, we had time frame, and we had budget. Those were measures of project success. In this case here, for measuring the requirements or the meeting of requirements, we want to take these requirements and figure out what kind of test could be applied to the requirements to determine that you're going to be successful, or that this specification was met and that your sponsor would be hopefully satisfied with the result. So again, back to the layers of onions. Now we're looking at that specification for encrypting campus data, and how will we test that to be sure that we've met this. In the first one, the first requirement, our criteria consisted of comparing this inventory of the devices, and these are all of the external devices that our ITEC staff has used to support campuses and to support ITEC internally. We have this inventory now, and we're going to compare a report that we get off of that system, and we're going to compare that against our PGP application dashboard. Our PGP application dashboard shows us in what state every one of these devices is. Has it been completed? Has it been encrypted? Did it start encrypted and now it's paused? That's how we'll measure this first requirement. Our second requirement is going to be measured by performing ad hoc audits. All right? We buy equipment regularly. We buy it usually during the OAS buys that go on 3 or 4 times a year. But in between, there are some times where we do buy smaller buys, but still, those are devices that could potentially have sensitive data on them, so we want to be sure that there's a process in place to get those devices encrypted within 2 weeks of the buy. So in order to do that, we said, all right, we're going to do an ad hoc audit after we do this buy, and we're going to find out if any of those devices are out of compliance, and then we'll be able to measure that and take an action on either correction with the policy or just a reminder to the staff. And then this third requirement, thought it best to take some staff who would need to have access to their non-encrypted drives and walk them through this new procedure that was put in place so they could gain access to their unencrypted drives. So we just did a dry run on that, and it did work out well. We made a few tweaks to it, and we decided that was going to be sufficient for that test. Okay, then I'll move on to the last section here. Does anyone have questions on the development of a test case or a use case based upon a requirement? Okay. Now here's a sample, and as Ralph had mentioned earlier, this PowerPoint will be made available to SUNY PM on the SUNY PM space along with the recording afterwards. So you'll have this at your possession. You can use it as a guidebook if you'd like. But here's the test plan, the more specific test plan for those 3 requirements that we've outlined. All right. So the first requirement is the comparison of the inventory of devices, comparing this to a report that was generated from the PGP application. Reading from left to right, here's the procedure that was taken in order to follow that test all the way through to its end. First, we ran the inventory report and we output it to a .csv file. Then we ran the PGP report and we output that to a CSV file, and then we merged the two and sorted them and compared it. And what we are expecting to see, which you'll see in the fourth column over, is we would hope to see that the administration report from our PGP dashboard would say that we have compliance and that all of these devices are in the state called complete, and they are encrypted. And they were done before the deadline of September 24th. The fifth column over is the quality piece, the measure. This is the metric. This is what our target was to gain approval and to gain acceptance of this particular test. We expected that 100% of the target devices were encrypted by our due date of September 24th. There were 189 total to do. Our actual results are shown in the final column on the right. On our deadline date of the 24th of September, we only had 86% of them actually encrypted. The rest of them were in a state that was either incomplete, they hadn't started, they were paused, they weren't done. Okay. So we needed to take some, address that with the devices and with the individuals, and then we did another push, and we now then went to 100% encryption on the 5th of November. So you can see here that we did not make our budget, or excuse me, we did not make our time frame. Our original time frame was to be completely finished by the end of September. We were actually a little bit more than a month late by the time we were done with that particular test. Okay. Questions on that? I can walk through the second requirement and the third requirement. Really here the idea was to give you a level of detail about how to construct a test or use case, and then how to construct the procedures and the results, and different ways that you can measure those tests and measure those use cases to achieve the quality measures, the quality metrics that you set out to meet at the beginning of your project. All right. Questions on that? Okay. All right, I'll move on. Okay. I just brought up this chart again as a refresher. As Ralph had mentioned in the beginning, and we walked through this chart from top to bottom, left to right, hopefully you can see then how this iterative process of gathering requirements, gathering functional specifications, followed by gathering your use cases and building your use cases can help in determining several things. First, that you've covered all of the scope of your project, all right, using your requirements. Secondly, that you've got an idea of how you're going to measure the quality of your use cases or quality of your requirements. Thirdly, how you're going to understand how to measure the test cases and how to determine what time frame that might take. And also, if you are tracking budget, this would be a good place to also understand how you're going to measure whether or not you met your budget. Okay. In this particular project, we had to go back to our functional specifications a few different times because we had missed some steps in our application design that led us to believe that we had areas and devices that are possibly carrying sensitive data that weren't being trapped. So we went back to our functional specifications and our requirements a couple of different times before we actually started the development of this policy. And that answers your question you had earlier, Carolyn, which was making sure that you had that all buttoned up in a way prior to when you actually started to work on the development of the project. Okay, so all in all, this project did meet most of its quality measures that were set out in the beginning. We were late in our delivery. The project had gone into a yellow state a couple of times because of that. But as far as the measures that were set out for a successful project, we did meet that, with the exception of the time frame.
And actually, Krista, you mentioned something that I think probably should have been clarified early on when I was giving part of this presentation. She mentioned that they were a month late. And being late on a project doesn't necessarily mean that the project was not a success. And we mentioned schedule as one of the things that define success. However, when things change, when scope changes, whether it's creep or even sometimes a requirement is taken away, it can affect your schedule. And as long as that's properly managed, and the customer understands that change or creep is going to affect the schedule and or budget, and that expectation is met properly, then the project is still considered a success. And if I remember correctly, Mike Notarius being the sponsor, every issue that was raised was brought to his attention, and he was kept apprised of the schedule the entire time.
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct. All right. Comments on the...
That's a very good point, Ralph. Your sponsor should be involved in these types of things that cause a project's success factors to change from what they originally agreed to. And sometimes it is a sponsor who brings forward new requirements or removes them or changes them in such a way that your schedule is impacted by that. So again, back to the original drawing, requirements are really important that the project sponsors sign off on them, and they also sign off on any changes to requirements as the project progresses.
Great. So now we'll hear some discussion and Q&A from the group, and then as well, if we want to have any discussion after that, we can do so.
Diagram, comments on the test plan? I'll go back and bring that up.
So, Krista, also when you're developing your project plan, all of these procedures and the activities involved in the testing are on your schedule, resources are assigned, so
right.
Time and effort is dedicated to the activities on the test plan.
That is correct. Right. And as I had mentioned earlier, I don't like to set the developers loose on developing the product until there is a clear design in place and a clear set of use cases for which we are developing to. Okay, we want to know before we start the development what we're going to be testing at the other end. And you know, that's kind of fuzzy in our world with software development and our integration work, because it's really, when we start, it always feels like it's a big unknown. There could be a big unknown, and there's a lot of risk there. And it's true, there is, but there's also enough information about using our experience from our developers, using our tools that we have with our vendors, our documentation from our vendors. We can really craft at least a high-level set of use cases that could be used to be sure that at least we hit some of the targets out of the gate. Okay, and I think really here the point is that you really should have a test plan. You shouldn't skip testing altogether. You need to have a conscious effort placed and time placed into figuring out what's reasonable and what's doable to test. And that it really also includes, well, what do? You set up an environment, you set up a proper test environment, you want to set up some test data that's appropriate to what you're building. You want to have some people assigned, and this includes people from the business, users, end users. You want to have those folks involved in building those cases because they're going to be involved in saying, yes, it works, or no, it doesn't.
Hey, Krista, I'll ask a quick question. A lot of what you talked about had to do with software development or integration, but how would this apply to something like rolling out new servers for a service?
Well, it's really the same thing. You've got some functions you expect those servers to perform, right? And you have a time frame that you would like to have this done, and your servers are either going to be all connected together as they should, and a test case would prove that, all right? So your functional requirements would state what the servers have to do, and your test cases, your use cases would prove that what you built with these servers actually delivers what you intended them to do, and they light up fine, and they're ready to go. So, same theory, same method can be used to build that.
Thanks.
All right. Any further questions? All right, then what I'd like to do is we'll wrap up now, and I just wanted to offer the presentation and the recording will be available out on the SUNY PM space. There'll be a message to the SUNY PM listserv within about a week's time with this recording and this presentation. I also want to ask people to mark their calendars for our next session, which is in April. Our next session.
So we're going to stop the recording there because that's some stuff that isn't valid to us. Krista, did you want to give any last minute notes, conclusions, anything else you wanted to mention?
Just really the recap of the importance of getting those good solid business requirements set up front, and also reiterating that if you are in a position where the products have already been deployed or ready to be deployed, it is also really critical for your own success and for the success of the project to really get those requirements from the sponsor and from the functional users so that you're on the same page with them when it goes into production, and what they expect to happen is what you are testing for.
Great. You know, as a former software developer, I understand the importance of these test plans. They really help make sure that you are performing to what you need to and that you're going to get the results when you get out of it. So I can definitely understand this stuff. So, all right. So a couple little recaps just for us, just to let you know. One, we will have our March monthly webinar on March 25th at 11 a.m. As we indicated before, it will be a training led by Microsoft on MS Planner. So please mark that down on your calendar so that you can join us. It won't be held live in Workplace like these ones. It will be held in MS Teams. The link will be coming out later and be posted in the group so that you can join us. But we will also take the recording and put that up on the SUNY CPD YouTube page so that people can watch it later if you aren't able to be with us live. We also will have a webinar in April on the 22nd. So make sure you mark that down on your calendar as well. We won't be having one in May due to CIT. And the other thing that Krista and I wanted to remind you, if you haven't been in the group recently, definitely check it out. We do have a poll up right now asking people what project management tool you are using on your campus, if you're using anything, or if you're using something ad hoc. We'd like to know about it. We're in the process of planning and creating some advanced project management classes, and that's part of what we're going to be talking about. So we're trying to get the pulse of what SUNY is using so that we can include that in our classes that we're going to be having in the future. So any last minute thoughts or anything else you want to mention, Krista?
No, that's good. A good recap of our upcoming events. and for people to visit our PM community of practice on Workplace. It is a valuable resource for all things PM.
Yes. Oh, and as well, I forgot I wanted to mention, if you haven't heard yet, STC, SUNY Technology Conference, will be virtual for 2021. Keep an eye on your inboxes and on Workplace. There'll be more information about registration for that and submittal of topics and presentations. So if you have something of interest, definitely take a look at that. They usually have some really good things on project management out there, whether it's somebody that's recapping a project that they did, or actually talking about project management concepts. So it's a great place for you to network and meet with other IT folks in the SUNY community that talk about and do project management. So definitely keep your eye on your inboxes for that. So, all right. With that, we are going to sign off. Thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions, definitely put them in the comment section of the video, even if you're just watching the recording. Krista and I do keep a good eye on that, and we can get back to you pretty quickly. Thank you, and we will see you in March. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Kris.